Ignatius Press and the Augustine Institute present the Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter. If you like us, please help us by subscribing and by reviewing us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you might listen. And don't forget to sign up for weekly updates and study questions at formedbookclub.ignatius.com.
Welcome back to the Formed Book Club. Father Fessio here in Ignatius Press offices, Vivian nearby but at home, and Joseph Pearce in South Carolina, I believe. We continue our discussion of the City of God, and I do not apologize for the fact we've taken so many sessions on this. This is a foundational book in Western civilization, and there's so much wisdom in here. And as I'm finding out now after reading this for the first time, because it was too big and cumbersome for me to overcome in my younger years, so many things I thought that I figured out for myself or, discovered, Augustine already said them, and said them better. So it's good to become deep in Augustine, in my view.
And this edition that Ignatius Press has done has made it so accessible, because you say the unexpurgated version, so to speak, is so bulky and intimidating, and parts of it are fairly obscure to a modern reader. That that Hans von Balthasar has done here has really made it very accessible. I mean, it's a good length. It's chunky but not too long, and the highlights he selected, I think, really do bring the City of God to life in the 21st century.
And Joseph, what do you even think about this? That for most of the books we've taken, instead of sort of summarizing a chapter or a section, we go to certain pages and certain citations, which we then read and then comment on. Should we keep doing that? Do you think that's satisfactory to people who are listening to these things? I guess we should ask them, but I mean, I don't know how they're going to respond.
Well, I'm not sure that if we rely on ourselves to make a general broad comment, that we're going to actually be as honed in on the content. It's going to be very impressionistic. It's in danger of being impressionistic, where we're giving a sort of an overview rather than saying, this, I think, is important and practical. So, I mean, I like the way we're doing, but if there's a way perhaps we can limit ourselves to one comment every 10 pages, so that we're not sort of getting stuck on 3 pages for half an hour, which happens sometimes. And of course, we go off on tangents, which that's a whole different issue, irrespective of what our engagement with the text, which can be fun.
Well, it is always fun for us.
What I like about the way we're going about it is that there's no pretense here that we're experts on the books that we're reading. We really are like a book club. It's good to make comments based on the text, always go back to the text, but I wouldn't trust myself to be able to say, well, what Augustine is really doing here, because I'm not an Augustine expert. None of us is. So I think what we're doing is kind of honest and interesting, and if people don't like it, they'll stop watching or listening.
Okay. Well, let's go forward then. We're still on the chapter or the section, the Doctrine of the Two Kingdoms, and we stopped around page 241 or sort of thereafter. I have something to comment on page 252. Does anyone have something before that?
I would like to comment on 248.
Okay.
Just Joseph, do you have anything?
Next comment's actually also 252. So you have the floor, Vivian.
Okay.
I wanted to just make note here of Augustine talking about magic, which nothing new under the sun here, with paganism being sort of the default position of human beings, and how he makes the distinction between miracles and witchcraft, which in his day there were some important people and I presume of some sort of Christian or Platonic leanings, who were promoting this thing called theurgy, Theurgy, which I had never heard of.
Theurgy, yeah.
And to make this important distinction, because those, Augustine says in the middle of the page here, those who use these terms, this theurgy, are trying, as it were, to draw a distinction among the devotees of these illicit arts. They want to make it look as though some deserve to be condemned, the ones whom the common people call sorcerers, for these, they say, are dealing in witchcraft, while others deserve praise, the ones whom they credit with practicing theurgy. In truth, however, both groups are entangled in the false rites of demons going under the names of angels. And I think in our own day, we often see people trying to make distinctions, right, between good magic and bad magic and new age spirituality. And, people can get muddled about, look, just stay away from this
black
stuff.
Magic. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, white magic, black magic, just what Christianity has always taught and always will teach to the end is just stay away from that stuff. Just.
Well, yes, and a very major popular expression of that is sort of the debate about Lord of the Rings and Rowland, what's her book?
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter. And of course, Michael O'Brien, who's a very fine author and artist, actually, wrote a book called Landscape of Dragons, something like that, where he's pretty critical of Harry Potter, and he compares it to Tolkien. This whole question of white magic, black magic, Gandalf or the others. It's a fascinating discussion. I really have not taken part in too much of it, but I think it's in the same sphere of interest that you've just brought up, Vivian. I don't hear any comments. Okay, let's go.
I was thinking maybe Joseph might like to.
Well, only just to clarify. I mean, not anything you said because you believe this, but just in case people might have misunderstood, that obviously Tolkien was a lifelong practicing Catholic, and he said that the Lord of the Rings is fundamentally religious and Catholic work, and insofar as he deals with what we might term magic in the Lord of the Rings, where it is really magic, it's sorcery. So he's basically completely and utterly harmonizing with what St. Augustine says here about those black arts, not those dark arts. But other things which might be called magic are such as the gifts that the elves have are actually just natural to the elves. So in other words, if we could fly like an eagle, now that would be considered magic for us, but it's not magic for an eagle, right? Because an eagle, that's what an eagle does. So when elves have powers, they're just elvish powers. Then that's nothing to do with trying to manipulate demonic powers as Sauron does and Saruman does in the Lord of the Rings. So Tolkien is very precise theologically in the way that he uses words such as magic, and when he uses them in the loose sense, he clarifies. He says what people might call magic, and then there's a but usually.
Your use of the word manipulation, I think, is really important.
Yes.
Because as Joseph Pieper points out in The Philosophical Act, which is a wonderful essay, the difference between true religion and false religion is true religion seeks to conform the person to God in order to do what God wills. And false religion is trying to make God or the gods do what you want them to do in order to impose your own will on reality. I think that helps with discernment as to what we're dealing with.
And that dovetails exactly with what Tolkien says, that one of the deepest allegorical dimensions of Lord of the Rings is it's an allegory of power usurped for domination. That's what it's a perfect definition of magic, usurping power for domination.
And that's why C.S. Lewis we'll talk about the parallel between magic and alchemy and modern science, which is sometimes used as an instrument of power to impose your will on nature. And perhaps the worst current aberration is this gender affirmation movement, where instead of conforming your feelings, your ideals, your images of yourself to your biological sex, we think we can conform our biological sex. We can have hormone treatments and surgery to make our sex like our gender view of ourselves. I mean, it's a complete turning upside down of the order of creation.
Yeah, I mean, the C.S. Lewis uses the perfect term for this in the title of his book, That Hideous Strength.
Yes.
That's what magic is. It's that hideous strength.
Right. And, so here's another discerning element in understanding when medical practice is really malpractice. Is this treatment or therapy or surgery helping nature be what God intended it to be? Are you actually healing and curing an infirmity that's preventing nature from being what it's supposed to be? Or are you warping and distorting nature or even life itself to impose your will on it, even to the point of killing in the name of medicine, which is really killing, euthanasia, abortion? These aren't even healing at all. They're acts of killing. So it's interesting, right? That the same tools we need for discerning religion are what we need to discern science and medicine, and whether or not it's doing good or whether or not it's actually doing evil.
Amen.
Amen. Two amens. So, Joseph, you mentioned page 252, so I'll let you go first, because I was going to read and comment on a large part of that page, but go ahead.
Well, I'm going to comment on a small part of it, but if yours is a large part, perhaps that overlaps, so forgive me. Just over halfway down, thus, even though the miracles of nature's visible order have lost their wonder for us, due to the fact that we see them all the time, still, when we view them wisely, they are greater than even the rarest and most unusual of miracles. For man is a greater miracle than any miracle done by man. And this reminds me of all sorts of comments I could make, but a quietness with the necessity of humility to be able to see with wonder, in order to see anything at all. But also Chesterton's wonderful line, "Give me miraculous eyes to see my eyes, those terrible crystals made alive in me, more miraculous than all the things they see." That's basically what's being said here by Augustine. Again, what we said earlier, he says, what other people have said much more recently, and often is not much better. Though I'm not sure this is better than Chesterton.
Yes, and Chesterton's poem, "To the Babe Unborn," is an example of this. If I could only see green growing from the ground or whatever. But also, I keep referring to, and I will continue to do so, C.S. Lewis's book Miracles, which is about miracles. And when Lewis talks about what a miracle is, there's some event which which is injected into nature from outside of nature, from the supernatural. He asks the question, is nature itself a miracle? And by his definition, well, yes, nature is an intervention by the supernatural into the natural order, because it creates a natural order. And that's exactly what Augustine is saying here. Even though the miracles of nature's visible order have lost their wonder for us, and of course, who is the personage of the 20th century who most encouraged in us a sense of wonder? I would say G.K. Chesterton. I mean, he writes essays on a piece of cheese or a ball of string or a feather that falls to the ground. I mean, everything for him is a sign of wonder. Joseph, just before what you quoted, there was another sentence I wanted to quote here, middle of the page. We have no obligation to listen to those who deny that the invisible God works visible miracles. By their own account, God made the world, and they certainly kind of deny the world is visible. So, again,
and the miracle. I mean, you mentioned Chesterton, but I mean, again, exactly on this, Chesterton said, we don't live in the best of all possible worlds. We live in the best of all impossible worlds.
yeah. Well, that's like, there was a great debate in the Middle Ages. It still kind of goes on. Would the Son of God have become man if man hadn't sinned? And I say, would the Son of God become man if man had sinned? I mean, either way, it's a free choice that God makes. And, it wasn't like our sin forced him to come down.
Right.
Well, then, to conclude that paragraph, Joseph, thus God, who made the visible heaven and earth, does not disdain to work visible miracles in heaven or on earth. By means of them, he rouses the soul, previously given over to visible things, to worship him, the invisible God. And this is a big theme in Augustine, especially the Confessions, that he was lost in the visible world, which he saw the beauty there, the goodness, all the good things there, but he poured himself out into the world, and only later did he realize, wait a second, oh, beauty ever is, ever new. You're the one that created all this. You're the ones behind all this. And how can I be lost in your creation and not turn to you as well and thank you for it? It's a beautiful theme that runs through a lot of Augustine. All right, have we exhausted that, or each other, or listeners, or viewers?
Well, I have nothing else on this chapter, so I don't know if anybody else does.
I'm willing to move on to the next chapter.
Let us move on, although that expression has been kind of co-opted by some groups that I don't support. The church as end time.
Let us sally forth then.
Yes.
No, I have 262, but I'm happy to defer.
Go ahead.
Is that? Yes. So at the top of the page there, that new paragraph, in this malignant world then, and in these evil days, the church is preparing through her present humiliation for her future exaltation. And the reason I highlighted that single sentence is that it could have been written about today, right? If we really want proof that what Augustine is writing 1,500 years ago, and more than that, right, 1,700 years ago, is as relevant and pertinent as today as then that is this malignant world. And I think it's important because we live in, many of us are seduced by progressivism, right? And conservatives, the progressivism, but things are getting progressively worse, right? So this malignant world, the world's malignant. It never used to be malignant, but it's malignant now. It never used to be bad. There was a golden age, of John Wayne, but now it's bad. So the idea here, we go back, 1,700 years. This malignant world, the world's always been malignant. And these evil days, they've always been evil days. And the church is always suffering a present humiliation because her exaltation is in the future. And the exaltation, ultimately, the future we're talking about, is not a golden age in future time, but eternity, heaven. And so this is the same in every generation. And it's very important because so many people out there are desperately depressed because everything was great yesterday and it's going to be worse tomorrow. Well, then this shows us otherwise.
Another thing to point out with that, Joseph, is that as you see, those expressions, malignant world and evil days, are footnoted. Why? Because Augustine is quoting scripture. And the footnotes of the citations are there below, John and Ephesians, 1 John and Ephesians, because that's how the apostles talked about their days. And that's already, 400 years or so before this book. So
Thanks for pointing that out, because you are completely correct. He's actually quoting or citing from scripture there.
What's really beautiful, though, is on page 264, or maybe I shouldn't say but, I should say and, because it's not a contradiction of what you said, is that no matter what's going on in the church, God brings good out of it. And in the middle of 264, Augustine writes, in fact, all the church's enemies serve a useful purpose. If they have the power of inflicting bodily harm on the church, they train her in patience. If they oppose her by holding evil opinions, they train her in wisdom. And in addition, whether it is with persuasive doctrine or with strict discipline that the church addresses him, they train her in benevolence or even in beneficence, so that even her enemies are loved.
Beautiful.
We have nothing to fear.
No, I would comment that even though I subscribe to Tolkien's view that history is a long defeat, with occasional glimpses of glory, in the big cycle, which is an entropic cycle, there are ups and downs. And I think in our country, the United States of America, I think that we've declined from the golden age of my youth. I think it actually was a relative sane moment, not
for you, Father, in particular, but maybe not for all.
No, but I think for most.
Obviously, the ups and I think the ups and downs.
It's hard to know what most is.
Pardon me?
The ups and downs.
It's hard to measure most.
Well, I mean, we didn't have abortion on demand. Homosexual marriage was, gender transitions, woke culture. We had a lot of terrible things, which we still have. But in addition, now we have, it's one thing to have abortions. We had abortions. It's another thing to say abortion is a good thing, which we now say legally, It's, I don't know. There's all kinds of indications. I lived then, I live now, and I'm not looking to go back to those days. But I do see that overall, the moral tenor of society as society, what people did privately, I can't be sure of, but was more elevated than it is now.
I think there was a social contract, if I can lower myself to use a French revolutionary term, in the sense that everyone accepted what we might call, in the broader sense of the word, Christian moral values as something which was coherent and cohesive and actually held society together. And even if you didn't believe in Christ, even if you didn't really believe in those values, you saw their value from a purely, shall we say, utilitarian perspective, that without those values, things start falling apart. And I think that was true. And I think the ups and downs that you're talking about really are, and I agree with them, there are ups and downs. It's connected to whichever philosophy is in the ascendant. And if you have a philosophy which you have today, which is narcissistic pride, all about self-empowerment, then obviously that's going to have extremely harmful consequences on the body politics and on society. So that I agree. But then there's when philosophy becomes this bad, it also becomes self-defeating and self-destructive, and very messy. And normally you get the up that follows it because there's a reaction against it, which is healthier.
Good. I want to stand at page 264, 5 lines from the bottom. This has to do with the church in the world. Even when those on the outside do not rage, and there appears to be, the church that is, and there appears to be really is tranquility, which is a great consolation, especially to the weak, there are still some on the inside, that is, Catholics, indeed there are many, who by their dissipated morals torment the hearts of those who live pious lives. They cause the name of Christian and Catholic to be blasphemed. And the more precious his name is to those who want to live a godly life in Christ, the more deeply they are pained that due to the wicked on the inside, it is less loved than the minds of the godly desire. Again, all these things could be written today and be quite appropriate. You think about the church, what has happened because of the sexual abuse crisis, and how people are pained by that, to see priests who should be models of chastity and genuine love for people have abused that. Of course, that causes pain to those who want to live a godly life and want priests to live a godly life.
And again, the word scandal, stumbling block, it causes people to stumble, and that's one of the, again, a recurring thing. And I'm writing a book for Ignatius at the moment, which is a history of Christendom. And I've just finished a chapter on the 10th century, and it was a pretty bad time. Particularly with ungodliness within the church, including the highest echelons of the church. So, this is all a wake-up call that, there's nothing new under the sun in that sense. I actually highlighted just below that, Father, this is not so much about immorality as heresy. Many who want to become Christians are compelled to hesitate due to the heretics' dissensions. So I'm reminded here, bringing things very much up to date from St. Augustine to Pope Benedict XVI, who envisaged the need for a smaller but actually bona fide church that would be the mustard seed, because it would be united. And if you have a large church that's quarreling amongst itself, and there's no coherence, and it's no attraction, and there's no real way you can evangelize, because what exactly is the church saying? If it seems as incoherent and as relativist as the rest of the world, how can it evangelize? So better have a smaller, purer, orthodox, authentic church than something which lets everybody in, irrespective of what their beliefs are.
Yes, a smaller, purer church of sinners who recognize they are sinners and therefore not some kind of spiritual elite. But at the same time, while sinners, accept the teachings of the church and her history and are not trying to modify, change, or cause the church to progress. It's important to realize that you don't want to have a conventicle, of people of Pharisees, basically.
Agree. I obviously that's not what either Pope Benedict means or I mean. So thanks.
But I was thinking, just this morning, I was distracted in prayer, as I almost always am, that maybe it's okay to be both the Pharisee and the publican. That is to say, with the publican, Lord, I'm not worthy, have mercy on me, I'm a sinner. But also with the Pharisee to say, Lord, I thank you that you put me in a situation where I don't have these temptations people have to do these horrible things of killing people or dismembering people or whatever. I don't do that, but I'm sure I would if it weren't for the fact that you put me in a different situation and give me special graces. So I think it might be okay to pray with the Pharisee as well as the publican, as long as you pray with both of them. Go ahead.
And so long as the Pharisee is saying, but for the grace of God, there go I.
Yes. Yeah.
But that's not what he's saying. And that's why Jesus asked, and which of these men went away justified?
Yeah.
If the Pharisee had only
proud, I'm agreeing with you, Vivian. Insofar as the Pharisee is proud, right, then we can't be praying with him. But insofar as he's genuinely grateful for the fact that through the grace of God, he's not even tempted to live the life of the publican, then we can definitely pray with him. But then he's no longer a Pharisee according to that definition.
Yeah. I mean, if I were born into a family in the inner city with no father and a mother with a boyfriend, and the only, friends I had were in gangs, I'd probably be in jail now.
That's right. And that's not to be an environmental determinist that you could only be in jail now.
Right,
but there's no question that the difficulties and challenges to live a good life and to rise above these things, these evil forces in your life. It's just hard. And so the key here too is in that story, in that parable, the Pharisee is holding the publican in contempt.
Yes,
And
I'm not like
that
these
is
other
always
men.
the sign of pride. When, yes, be grateful that you aren't living in a housing project, and be grateful. It's when you hold in contempt the man who is and say, well, thank God I'm not that guy, then watch out. Watch out.
Now, there's
As
something.
C.S. Lewis, since we're quoting C.S. Lewis left and right, C.S. Lewis said, I don't remember in which book, pride is the only anti-God mentality.
A
Very
very
good.
brief quotation on page 266, the bottom of that initial section there. And this is something we've said a few times, but it's good to remind ourselves that Augustine actually says it specifically, explicitly. In this world, in fact, these two cities, the city of God, the city of men, remain intermixed and intermingle with each other until they are finally separated at the last judgment. So they're mixed not only in that you have different people who are wearing black hats and white hats, but we all are wearing a black hat and a white hat,
The saints and the sinners in the church are the same people.
Yep.
And you've heard me say this many times. We don't, just to show you, we don't just quote C.S. Lewis. But one of my favourite quotes from Solzhenitsyn is that the battle between good and evil takes place in each individual human heart. So the city of man, the city of God, is in here.
And you can just, this quote, Father, you just quoted, you can just add to that Jesus' warning to us about not trying to pull the weeds out ourselves.
Yeah.
And you who have gardens, you know how when little plants are coming up, first of all, it's hard to tell what that plant really is. Is it a weed or is it the thing I planted?
Yeah.
And also when you try to pull even if you know for sure something is a weed, you go to pull it out and up comes the good plants with it, right?
Yeah.
And so, they're intermingling until the final judgment, the last judgment, and that will be a judgment, thank God, done by God and not by me. Because I can be really wrong. Really, really wrong.
I have one more comment on this section. Anybody else have more comments on it?
I was just going to say very briefly, and then I don't really have anything else I need to say in this chapter. But on the next page, page 267, we know not the hour. We all know people in my parish who are convinced that the world's come to an end at a certain time, and they're prepping not for the collapse of the government, but for the end of the world. It is to no avail, therefore, that we try to compute and determine the number of years that remain for this world. The year which fictitious divination foretold and which foolish delusion believed has already come and gone. In other words, even in his day, there were these people that there was a certain date when it was all going to come to an end. Get yourself ready, prepare, and that date comes and goes. And since then, there have been many, numerous, the number is legion of end of the world dates that have come and gone. That basically, the end of the world for us is when we die. That's the only one we have to worry about. Everything else in God's hands, and that's the only place to leave it.
Well, this is an anecdote. I think it's true, but I may be garbling it. St. John Bosco was, he was playing soccer with the kids. And someone asked him, what would you do if you knew the world was going to end right away? He said, I keep playing soccer. I'm doing this for God. So we have to be ready in whatever we're doing for the end. Because it could come at any time. By the way, the world ends for each one of us at death. I mean, we don't have to wait till the end of time. We're gone at that point and judged.
And another caution about trying to foretell this or claim to know it, or this back to wheat and tares and Pharisees and publicans. On 271, here's another very humbling thing to consider. It is uncertain whether anyone who now seems to stand is going to fall, and whether anyone who now seems to be fallen is going to rise. It ain't over till it's over.
Until the fat lady sings, yes.
And so, surrender yourselves to the hands of God.
Well, on this topic, a related thing about, trying to determine when the end's going to come, the book of Revelation is a very complicated book, and it's not easy to interpret, and people often will, try and use it as a prediction of when the end times are actually going to take place and calculate to the year and the month and the date. But I like this Augustine's interpretation now, and already like 1,700 years ago, page 275, the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Third line down. These 1,000 years are no doubt to be understood in the same way, that is, as the time since Christ's first coming. So we're in the 1,000 years, but as we know, in God, 1,000 years are as one day. So it doesn't mean the year 1,000, although they had the so-called millennialists, I thought the world was going to end then. No, God is going to end it when the perfect timing arrives for that ending, and we'll know what the timing is after it happens. All right. Anything else on this?
1,000 years. 1,000 years could just be 1,000 years as a perfect number. In other words, it's serving a symbolic purpose.
Yeah.
But,
I have a beautiful story to tell about this, if I may.
Sure.
When I was a little girl and not going, my family was not a church-going family, and a lot of dysfunction in the family. But I started going to church with Baptist neighbors and so on, and was introduced early on to a lot of this end of the world stuff and the second coming stuff and the book of Revelation being interpreted in these very decisive ways and so on. And I remember being very troubled as a child after hearing some of this stuff. And I went to my father, completely unchurched, uncatechized, unformed, anything. And I just went to him and said, how will we know it's Jesus when he comes back? How will we know? How will we know when it's really happening? How will we know it's really him? And my father, in that moment, just hugged me and said, don't worry, Vivian, you'll know what you need to know. And here was a man who knew, I just see how the Holy Spirit can work in the most surprising ways and from the most surprising sources to tell us the truth we need when we need it.
Very good. So we'll come back next week to conclude. We'll certainly take this chapter, a section, the supreme good and the last things, and I'm going to warn you and any listeners out there, I have about 7 or 8 long passages I want to read and comment on. This is a phenomenal finale to this book. But nevertheless, if you don't have it, go and get Henri de Duboc's The Church, Paradox and Mystery. We'll be discussing that eventually, and hopefully very soon. God bless you all. See you next week.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Forum Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at forumbookclub.ignatius.com.